Well, good evening and welcome to the Waring House. I wish you were in the room with me, but with the pandemic and everything, everybody's social distancing. I'm equally glad that you've decided to tune in with us. And we're going to have some dinner that Chef Travis has prepared for you and is sending out to you. There's going to be a little communication from him as far as notes and everything as to how the food should be prepared. And we're going to talk a little bit about the wine. So I've called this little segment Brand Australia because winemaking in Australia is a little different than anywhere else in the world. Australian wines are very recognizable for their fruit-forward style, and a lot of that is not necessarily so much to do with the terrain, the climate, and the soil, which of course are very important to all wines anywhere. But in Australia, the traditions of winemaking, the way they deal with the technology of making wine is a little bit different than anybody else. So their wines do definitely stand out as being unique. So to understand this winemaking style of theirs, it's best to maybe take a little bit of a look at the history. Wines have been in Australia for a long time. The first vines were planted in the late 1700s. And by the 1800s, the mid-1800s, there was actually commercial winemaking going on. The key here, though, is that there were no native vines. We had native vines in North America. Didn't make great wine, but we had the native vines here. There were none. There were no grapevines in Australia. So everything that was brought, all of the grapevines that are grown now today and for always have been Vitis vinifera. These are the noble grapes from Europe. And so they had the leg up in that regard, that they were able to pick the grapes that they wanted that worked well for their climates and soils there, based on what had come from the old world. It being a hot climate, a lot of them are Shiraz. Shiraz grapes from the south of France do very well. Cabernet Sauvignon has done well. Merlot has done well. But they were able to pick what they wanted to bring in. There have never been any crossings. There are no hybrids going on. There's nothing like that. It's always been Vitis vinifera. So by 1890, by the end of the 1800s, they were actually making a lot of wine. Just the region of Victoria was making about 18 million gallons annually, which is a significant amount of wine. But they weren't great wines. Most of what they did there was fortified wines, because in those days, if they were to ship them to Europe or North America or anywhere other than just the country of Australia, the ocean voyage would disrupt the wines quite a bit. So they fortified them to make them a little bit more sturdy. If we skip ahead a full century now and we come up to the present, Australian wine as a brand, as I've called it, is really interesting, because in about 1996, the Australian government and the wine producers got together and they decided that they really wanted to put a focus and really develop winemaking in Australia. So they set a target of $4.5 billion in sales. And they thought that it would be reasonable if they could get that done by 2025. Well, in actuality, it was 2003 when they met that target. So they were way, way, way ahead of the curve. And hopefully we're getting ahead of our curve here in Ontario too, but that's a different curve. By 2006, $7 billion in sales. By 2006, we were up to 2,000 wineries. Now, not all the wines are great. The wines that you're going to have with dinner tonight are. They're very high-end wines. We'll get to that in a little bit of a moment. But the bulk of most of the wines that are made in Australia are from what we call clear skin. Now, clear skin in Australia is leftover grapes. So there are a lot of big grape growers. Here in the county, for example, we have small grape growers. Everybody pretty much makes the wine from what they grow. They may bring in a little bit of fruit from outside. But in Australia, they have a lot of big vineyards. So these grapes produce a lot. And so the leftover grapes from this production sometimes come up for sale at discounted prices. So clear skins, the way that they present these more mass-produced wines in Australia are bag and box, but I'm not talking the little 3-liter ones that you see in the LCBO here in Canada. These are boxes that you can see from this picture that are stackable. There's about a case in each one of these wines, and they really get handled in restaurants and bars more like draft. So the wines are online, as it were, and in Australia, largely that's the way most wines are purchased, by the bag and box. Bottle is kind of a North American and European thing that they do for us. But these are the bulk of the wines that are being made. So wines from Clearskin, mass-produced wines that are made by larger companies from grapes that they purchase from many different areas. The importance of these wines, I think, is probably best demonstrated by this one particular wine that you're not having tonight, unless you've got some at home. It's Yellowtail. It's become very, very popular. It's not as popular as it was. It has tailed off a little bit, but the story of Casella Wines, the company that produces Yellowtail, is very instructional as to the way wines are made in Australia. In 1957, a couple, Filippo and Maria Casella, immigrated from Italy, and they set up a vineyard. That's what they knew how to do from the old world. So they were growing grapes. A few years later, they decided to make their own wines. In 1969, they brought up a family, and one of their sons, John, in 1994, was of an age and had been educated in wine, and decided that with these new programs from the government of Australia, they were going to try to make a wine brand that they could sell internationally. So the idea for Yellowtail came up from these clear skin grapes that they would purchase. They created an interesting, attractive, fun logo that they could help to market it with. They put up a great big ad campaign, and their first focus was in the United States. So they thought that if they sold 25,000 cases, that would be pretty good for what they were doing. But in reality, in the first year, they sold 200,000 cases in the United States. And based on that success, they decided to broaden their horizons a little bit, and they looked at the British and Canadian markets. So by 2005, they were selling 7.5 million cases globally. 2006, they generated profits of $77 million on $255 million of sales. So, you know, these are pretty impressive numbers. And it was a success story. How do the Australians do it? How do they get away with this? Well, there's 4 things that really are the key to Australian winemaking. And as I said, wine science, the wine technology is very, very important. Early on in the game, they established a very, very highly respected wine program at the University of Adelaide, Roseworthy College. And they have winemakers that come from all over the world to train there. Joe Will, who's a Canadian winemaker down in Niagara, that's where he got his winemaking education. Also, the Australian Wine Research Institute is very active in promoting and helping people get started in winemaking. And the Flying Winemakers, you've all remember there used to be a show, maybe I'm dating myself now, Flying Doctor was an Australian doctor. Well, they have Flying Winemakers. And the Flying Winemakers are guys that will go to school and start learning their trade in Australia, going to Roseworthy College, and then in the summer, which is their winter, they will come to Prince Edward County or Niagara or California or somewhere in the Northern Hemisphere where they can continue making wine and learning the techniques of other countries. So these guys are really serious about what they're doing. The second thing that goes from the wine science is the winemaking technique. And they do some things a little bit differently here. In Canada, in Europe, in the United States, there's not as much blending goes on. In Prince Edward County here, we have a lot of small wineries that make basically wine from their own fruit. They do it a little bit differently in Australia. Regional blending is de rigueur. That's what they do there. They take the opportunity to get the best fruit that they can get from sites from different terroirs and then bring it back to their wineries, produce it there, and then blend it after the fact. Crop sciences, irrigation is something that they do there quite a bit. We very few people in Canada irrigate. We don't really need to, other than, say, the Okanagan Valley. There's a lot of irrigation goes on there, but it's just not necessary for us. But Australia tends to be a hotter, drier climate. And for the little slide there in the bottom right corner that I just called up, you can see one field that has been irrigated and one right across the road from it that hasn't. So with the irrigation, they can grow excessively large volumes and yields of fruit, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's the highest quality. Grapes like to be stressed, and when you're making bringing irrigation into play and you're looking at getting bigger yields of fruit, your wines aren't going to be all that great, but those are the ones that go into these clear skins. These are the excess wines that are left over. So the top slide there on the top right shows you the three biggest sections that sort of are in New South Wales. And they are situated around the Murrumbidgee River and the Murray River. And these are high production regions that make a lot of wine. They make a lot of fruit that gets turned into a lot of wine. So Lindemans, Yellowtail, Banrock Station, these are names that I'm sure that you're familiar with and you've seen in the liquor stores here in Ontario, and that's where they come from. So irrigation from these two large rivers allows them to make a lot of wine. The third thing is that there are no appellation controls. Here in Ontario, we have the VQA, which tells you how to grow your fruit, how to make your wine. It dictates what the package is going to be like, even how big the print is going to be and what you can say on it. So it's a very strict set of principles that we and guidance that we make our wines under here in Ontario. In Australia, not so much. They don't really have any rules. It's more like the Wild West. There's no mandated authority like the VQA to govern how they make their wine. For well or for not, it's just the way they do things. But the good side of that is it allows them to innovate. When winemakers pretty much have their hands tied here as to how their wines are going to be made, there's not really a lot of experimentation goes on. And in Australia, they're more wide open to do more innovative things as far as their winemaking goes. Third thing is the climate. Now, we all think of Australia as being a hot, dry, arid continent, and largely it is. But the main winemaking areas, as you can see from this map on the top right, are all along the coast for the most part. And if you're inland, they're higher up, higher in altitude, so they are relatively cool regions, which retains a little bit more acidity, makes the grapes a little more complex, makes them more interesting. The Australian cultural identity. Now, I think that this is one of the most important things about the winemaking in Australia. I think everybody has an impression of Australian people being kind of fun, being a little irrelevant maybe. They're interesting people that if you ever meet one, Australian people are all like that. They're very outgoing people for some reason. The cultural identity is also promoted through a number of wine shows that they have in Australia. But the interesting key here to their wine shows that are competitions where the producers put their wines in and they're awarded prizes and medals based on the quality of them. They're only open to Australian wines. So it used to always be interesting to me when I was in the LCBO. Customers really want the holy water sprinkled on the wine. They want somebody to tell them that their wine is going to be good. And when you can buy a wine like the Taylor's wine that's on the right-hand side there, I think that you can be guided along by all of the stickers and the awards that it's won, that this individual wine is probably a pretty good one. At least that's how it usually works in the store. When people see something like that leads them to it, they're more confident picking up the bottle of wine and taking it home. So with dinner, tonight with your main course that you're going to prepare. It's a steak with a mushroom sauce that Chef Mindel has put together for you and given you the instructions so that hopefully you can make a restaurant style dinner at home and enjoy it with one of these 2 bottles of wine. Now, some of you will be getting one, some of you will be getting the other. And the reason for that is we're using the wine that was originally going to be served to you tonight here at the Waring House. We only had 4 bottles of it. Now, right now, the LCBO is going through some issues with their supply chain. Not all of their orders are coming to them for whatever reason. So there's not a lot of wine in the Vintages corner of the LCBO. We had enough interest in this that the 5 bottles that we had purchased for the dinner just weren't going to be enough. So we had to find some more. So I went and I visited Scott at the LCBO, and he had another bottle of wine that I thought was going to be of the same quality as the first one that we picked. They're not the same, but they are similar, at least in their quality levels. These are very high-end Australian wines. These aren't yellowtail wines. These are going to be great ones for you. So some of you are going to get the Mount Adam, which is on the left-hand side there. It's a blended wine. It's partly Cab Sauv and it's partly Shiraz. The other one, the Rye Mill, is straight up Cabernet Sauvignon. Now these wines, the regions that they came from are both very close to the city of Adelaide in New South Wales, or pardon me, Southern Australia. The Mount Adam, the one on your right-hand side, is this blend, and it comes from the Eden Valley. So again, it's not on the coast, but it's higher up, a short way from the coast, making very, very high caliber wines. The first settlers in the Eden Valley and in the Clare Valley, which adjoin it, were German. So there are some great Rieslings that come out of there, but this one is red, and it's really a great bottle of wine. Now, the other one, the Rye Mill, if you end up with that in your gift package that comes to you, it's straight up Cabernet Sauvignon, and it comes from an area just to the east of the city of Adelaide called Coonawarra. And the neat thing about Coonawarra is it has a soil there that's very unique only to that area. It's called Terra Rosa. And the top maybe 2 feet are very, very, very much iron-based. So they have a really red tinge to them. And they're overlaying a deep stratus of very permeable, porous limestone. So this does 2 things for the wine. The limestone is very permeable, and the roots go down really deep into the ground with it. But there's also a complexity brought on by the 2 totally different layers of soil that the plants are growing on. So you're getting a minerality from the limestone, but you're also getting a power from the iron content of the upper layers. So they're both really interesting wines. They'll both go really well with the meal that you're going to be preparing for yourself. So that's pretty much what I have to say about Australia for you today. Hopefully we get you back here to the warehouse before the next one, but that's probably not going to happen. If you've enjoyed this, we may do another module to this later on in May, and if we do, it will be on the Loire. So that's what we would have been presenting to you here at the Waring House, and we'll do the same thing. Get you a little bit of more information about the wines that you're going to be enjoying, and put a takeout meal together with the chef, and hopefully you enjoy it. So thanks so much for tuning in. Enjoy your meals, and hopefully we'll see you at the Waring House before too long.